was talking about. But anyhow, I've heard some of his spiel before. But thank you. Yeah, so it's great to be here. I'll share some of my story as we kind of go through today. So just real quick, a little bit more of a reference. Both Paula and I run a 5-bed women's recovery home in Olive Branch, Mississippi. One of the things, and I've got bookmarks up here, I've got business cards, all that, make sure you grab some stuff. What makes us unique, and what I love about it, and because Paula started volunteering about 8 years ago, and that's how I got involved in the recovery process. And she fell in love with that world. And what I love about it is that there's this whole spectrum. You know, just even each of you, if we got to know each other, you each do something just a little bit nuanced, a little bit different than one another, right? And so you're leaders in your own right in what you do. And so with us, we take 0 insurance, and we have 0 paid employees. We're a 100% volunteer organization. And so it's a beautiful thing. So I like to sort of rib my counterparts that have insurance and have these nice places that, you know, our entire budget probably is 1 month pay for one individual of recovery. So we can operate a home on that in a year and have 4 people go through the program that we have there. And but there's a place for all of us. And it just as we were talking yesterday, Dale and I, you know, one shoe doesn't fit everyone. And so what you do is important. So today I want to talk about relational leadership, but as I do, make sure you put your hat on and recognize this fits you, right? So, you know, because a lot of times we look at leadership as a position, a paid employment. You know, I have a team and we do this, we do this, we do this, therefore I'm a leader. Well, you all are leaders in your own right, because to be a leader, all you have to do is set an example, and someone is watching you, right? I mean, trust me, you do something and someone is watching you. Anybody got a child that's under the age of 20? Somebody's watching you, right? So you are a leader in your own right. And so, but I'm convinced this style of leadership is what we need for this day and age and for this era. Because if, you know, I had the opportunity to meet Pastor Hall yesterday, and he and I were sharing with one another. The world's a little bit different now than it was. In fact, it's different than it was 5 years ago, right? Everybody say COVID, right? So it's a little different. And so I'm convinced we need to lead differently. So I'm going to share 4 tips that are in my book. And you guys will have a chance. Everybody's got a blue ticket. We'll make sure at the end and draw. We'll give away 2 of those books, and I can sign it if you like. Real simple. But how many know sometimes the simple stuff is not easy, right? Say I love you to somebody you really don't like, right? It's simple, but it's not easy. So what I'm going to share with you is embarrassingly simple, but it's not easy. In fact, when I share it, there's plenty of folks that have read it. It's like, well, yeah, I knew that. Well, we might know it, but if we don't do it, what good is it, right? So let's go ahead and get started. Being in learning development, I was in the corporate world for too many years. And so we have our objectives here. Real simple. I'm a simple guy, kind of like Chad just said. So we're going to talk about what is relational leadership. Then we're going to talk about the how, the practical aspects. How can we actually be a relational leader, implement it? And then along the way, you'll learn some life lessons. Because I always love to look and turn things over and learn from anything. And so we really can. You know, I learned, Paula and I are fortunate, my daughter married early, so we became grandparents early. And when my grandson, who's now 11 and my size, when he was like 3, one day he came downstairs and he said, you know what? The devil gives you bad dreams and God gives you good dreams. And I thought, well, there you go. So you can learn from a 3-year-old, right? So I want to be conscious of time, not tell you too many crazy stories, but let's go ahead and get started. If I power this on, it should work. There it is. All right. So real quick, if you want to follow along, I'm going to share 8 things with you. So I'm going to share your 4 things, and then we'll share 4 more things, right? Have we got that? Lots of note takers I can see, so we're in good hands here. You'll find out I'm kind of snarky, cynical. Just love me anyhow, okay? Most people do. And then we have our digital people here. I see people pulling out digital devices. So the first thing is purpose. So as a relational leader, we focus on 4 areas. And the first area of focus is purpose. Plenty of people have debated me on this, but I stand firm on it, purpose. So you and your organizations, or even in your life, you have a purpose. You serve a purpose, and that purpose defines what you do, does it not? Yeah, how many go to church on Sunday, right? The Spiritual Care Network, probably most of us do, right? So your purpose defines what you do. So we have to clarify what our purpose is before we get started. Otherwise, we're leading, and we don't know where we're leading our followers. And we're not going to talk about the elections, but anyhow, you guys can guess what happens. All right. So next, after purpose, we have our, there it is. I have to be in view of the computer to see that. After purpose, we have our principles. So we define what our purpose is. What did God require us to do or ask us to do, or what do we feel like we should do? But then we need our principles to it. So our principles, a lot of companies, they have guiding principles, or they'll have values, or they'll have these wonderful little, these are the 10 things that we do and all that kind of stuff. So really, if you think about it, your principles, ethics, your principles are the way that you point towards your purpose. So if your North Star is your purpose, your principles are the compass to get you there. And so that's important. And then the 4th area is people. Now, some people want to put people first, and yes, people are a priority. However, if we put people first and we're unsure of our purpose, if we put people first and we don't have the principles to lead them the way they need to be led, then we're going to be just wandering in the wilderness for about 40 years, is my guess, right? Biblical reference for all those that don't know. But anyhow, sorry, I do get cynical at times, don't I, Chad?
Yes.
All right, but nonetheless, so with our people though, so how do we lead our people relational? Well, the beautiful thing about it is we have to know people to be relational with them. And so we'll unpack that more when we get to the second half of this, the next 4 areas. But we need to know people, and we live, I think the best Facebook meme that I saw recently was, I'm at the age now that I would rather have, as far as friends are concerned, I would rather have 4 quarters than 100 pennies, right? Yeah. Don't we live in a society where we all got 100 pennies jingling around, right? Yeah. But when you start to pay with 100 pennies, well, that's pretty tedious. But boy, those quarters, they feel like you got something in your hand, don't they? And so when we have those 4 quarters, just like Chad shared about our relationship, this is one of those 4 quarters that I carry. We have coffee, and Chad's got to see me cry more than once, and I've seen a little tear up in his eyes too, not just because of what I've said and what I'm going through, but his own. And so those are, if we're leading people and we can lead people with that type of relationship, think of the impact that we have. And so if you want to change people's lives, we have to have relationships. We just can't have pennies. And so I could go on and on about that, but in the work world, there's different ways you can do that. But I'm of the generation, I'm officially the last year of the baby boomers. They say 1964 is the last year of the baby boomers. I don't feel like a baby boomer, but the older I get, I guess the more I do. But anyways, so we're the last of the boomers. And with baby boomers, we used to show up, do our work, and go home. Leave your problems at home, shut the door, and when you come to work, you got your work face on, we work our 8, we work our 10, we work our 9, whatever, and we go home. We don't do that anymore, do we? Especially post-COVID, right? So it's work-life integration, and so, we get emails at 3 a.m., we do, we're available 24/7 to accept people into our programs, whatever the case is. And so it matters that we know people, it matters that we have relationship with people, and it's a little messier than it used to be because now we have some of that home stuff seeping into work. It was really nice and tidy when I started my career that you just left all that at home, you just deal with it, shut that in the closet. Right now we're working. But you know what? We need to care for one another and we'll work a lot better once we care for one another instead of keeping stuff in the closet, won't we? Okay? All right, so the fourth area that a relational leader focuses on is profits. Now, I'm come from the business world, so of course I'm going to talk about money, talk about profits. But really, when I talk about profits, the important thing to remember profits, and you know, I realize most of us are not running our own business and not terribly concerned about profits, but you know what? Chad mentioned budgets. Chad's got a budget. How many got a budget in this room for what you do, whether it's at home or in your work? You get a budget, right? So what happens if you go 6 months in a row and go over budget? Right?
Good.
Not too good, right? So profits are a little important. Well, you know, from a biblical perspective, what I like to think about with profits, it's not just the fact that we're money grubbing hungry, but you know what? If I want to take vacation, the company needs to make $1 or $2 extra so they can pay me when I'm not working, right? And then in my own life, what can I steward, or how am I stewarding what I have, right? So think of profits as stewardship. You know, we love to bash Wall Street for what these CEOs are making, these gazillions of dollars. And so I here, confession real quick. So how we doing on time? Yeah, we're all right. So confession real quick, I worked for Hilton Corporate for just short of 21 years. Well, the CEO of Hilton is just like a year older than me. Now, nobody cares, but when they hired him, that was the first thing, some reason I found out. And so maybe you're not like me. How many are sort of type A personality, a little bit driven, a little bit competitive? Yeah, a couple of people in there, yeah. So I found out how old he was, and it's like, okay, so he's running this place, and I'm sitting here way down the bottom of the food chain in this corporation. And so it was disappointing to me initially because I wanted to be so much more than what I was. But as I watched him, and he is a beautiful, wonderful CEO, but as I watched him, I thought, you know what? I kind of like going home at night and being there with my family. I kind of like going out and playing ball with my son, or trying to play ball with him, trying to get him to play ball, trying to get him to go outside, any of those things, my daughter. And so it's like, I don't care what you paid me. My lights were on, I had food on the table. I didn't need to travel the world and not see my family. And he made, I don't know, 8, 10, 12 times more than what I ever dreamed of making, right? So anyhow, so it's stewarding now. So the question is, how are you stewarding? So those are the 4 principles as a relational leader that we focus on. So it's sort of like a 4-legged chair. If you've ever had it, and everybody has, that chair, or you go to that cheap diner and that table, it has that one leg shorter than another, well, you got to fix it, right? But once you fix that leg, you might whack out one of the other legs, right? So it's important to have some balance in those 4 areas in your life, okay? So that's relational leadership, and that's actually what I cover in my book. So I just saved you about 2 hours, 3 hours worth of reading, but that's what's in the book there, and it's broken down a little bit different than that. But what I want to share now is kind of the how, because it's great to know these principles, and it's great to kind of drink the Kool-Aid and think it's beautiful, and there are examples in the book, so a little more detail. But the thing is, how do we do it? Well, my wife Paula's got this little saying that she has. We want to get some T-shirts. We just hadn't figured what we want to put on them, but we're going to put love covers, right? And so part of the how is the love covers. So think of it. Now, I'll use myself, so nobody's going to raise their hand, embarrass yourselves, right? But how many on your inside voice raise your hand? Don't do it outside, because we don't want to look at you and see this. But how many ever make stupid mistakes, right? So I can tell you, yeah, there you go. Yeah, right? It's a safe environment. Yeah. So I've made some stupid mistakes. And when you run in a home with 5 women in it and they're in recovery, believe me, most of them are not super happy to have guys around to begin with, right? Most of the time it's a guy that's the reason they are where they are. They either didn't have a daddy, the daddy they had was abusive, the boyfriend they had was abusive, whatever. Guys, we are the ugly ones in the room when it comes to addiction, when it comes to recovery, when it comes to trauma. And so I've made some mistakes, and unfortunately, I've made some of the girls in that house cry from time to time because I'm a little too abrupt or a little abrasive, or I don't see things quite the way they do, and I have to voice my opinion, and I shouldn't. And so they get a little upset at me. But in the end, thank God they know that I love them, and so it gets a little bit easier to tolerate me sometimes, you know. So that's when I say love covers, that's just a simple example that, you know, it's Chad, but we love him anyhow, right? And so that's the way it is. So it's Leonard, but we love him anyhow. All right, so let's get into the how. So this is the practical part. This is the secret part that's not in the book, but to me, this is the best stuff. So I call these, if you're taking notes, I call these the 4 constants of success. 4 constants of success. So I will guarantee you, whatever that's worth, as a guarantee from Leonard, I will guarantee if you do these 4 things, your life will change. Now, what are these 4 things? Number 1, conversation. How many of you, and this time do raise your hand, how many of you have ever had a conversation with someone, or someone had a conversation with you that was life-changing? Right? I've got 2 that I always pull out of my hat as an example. My 9th grade English teacher, I'll share, this is a simple, safe one for everybody here. 9th grade English, I was failing the first 6 weeks of school. You get your report card at 12 weeks. Well, I was failing. So Mr. Hauk, now mind you, I graduated in 1982, so you do the math how far 9th grade was for me. But Mr. Ralph Hauk, my English teacher in 9th grade, first semester, pulled me aside at 6 weeks and says, Leonard, I'm looking over your grades here, and if you keep going the way you're going, you're not going to pass. Now, everybody knows English is required to get out of high school, right? So we did A, B, C, D, E as our grading system. I had a D- on a good day in his class. So he pulled me aside, had a heart-to-heart with me, looked me in the eyes and said, Leonard, this and this, and I think you can do it. Here's what you need to do, da-da-da-da-da. And he gave me the talk. So I went from that nearly failing, that D- by the end of the year, I had just short of an A-. I was like a B+. So I was able to bring it up. So that was a life-changing event for me. Now, it's only English. Well, I love to write, I love to read. Because of English, it helps me to be able to do those things. So you think of you in your life, those simple, remember we talked about simple earlier, those simple conversations that you have. You know, hey Dale, I see you're doing a good job, but there's this one little area maybe we can work on just a little bit more. Don't you think if we did this, it would improve it just a little bit, right? And so that's a simple conversation, but it's not easy because we kind of got to get personal. We kind of got to step into where they are, and we kind of got to be brave enough to have that hard conversation with them. So that's the first thing, one of the first constants of success. The second one is connection. So we just talked about having 4 quarters versus 100 pennies, right? So if we're going to succeed in life, those conversations lead us to connections. So I was fortunate enough yesterday, Pastor Dale and I had a chance to sit down, and he was very gracious, and we had a good exchange. So we went from this, just a simple conversation, to a connection. We found out we've got some commonality. We found out there's a few things we like, a few things we don't like that we share with one another a little bit, right? So now we're in the building connection stage. So it's more than just that person you walk by on the street and say hi to. You've got a little bit of depth. In fact, they say that you know that you've got an actual relationship with someone if you can go 7 minutes in conversation without just talking about the weather or a sporting event. An actual conversation, if you can talk to somebody one-on-one for 7 minutes, then you've got a little bit of a relationship there. Well, if you're like me, it gets really creepy about 3.5 minutes in, and you start to scratch, what can we talk about other than the weather? You know, it gets a little tough sometimes, but it's important for us. And then the beautiful thing, we go from conversation to connection, And the third area that we go to then becomes collaboration. So think of it. One of us is great, but when we all get together, when we work together, when we actually collaborate together, we can accomplish so much more. I've got a friend, Steve Otterstrom, and what he said when talking about collaboration to me, he made mention that when two people get together, each person has their idea, and if you walk away with one person having the same idea as they came in the room with, then you haven't collaborated, you've compromised. And so think of it, when we collaborate with one another, when we actually roll up our sleeves and work with one another, it becomes a multiplier. We have so many more ideas than we had just by ourselves. Because I always say, when you put two people together, you got at least 3 or 4 ideas just right there, right?
Yeah.
You know? And so when we work together like that, it becomes this multiplier. You know, even a verse in the Bible, right? 1 could put 1,000 to flight, 2 is 10,000. Yeah. Not 2,000, but 10,000. Yeah. And so the importance of collaboration with one another. And then the beautiful thing is the fourth area is not so much something that we can just sort of automatically force to happen, but it does happen when we do these first 3 things. So conversation, connection, collaboration, and last is community. Now, I was shocked when Paula first started volunteering in the recovery world. I went to where she was working and volunteering, and what was interesting to me, I always had this concept, because I was a straight kid, you don't want to hear my life story because it's boring as heck. You'll never hear somebody like me give testimony on a Sunday morning because it's not exciting. I love the idea, and I've never done it, but you know, I can sit there and say what God saved me from, because I never did all that stuff. So he saved me from all that, right? And that is a testimony, I know. But nonetheless, when we talk about community, what surprised me when I saw Paula working with these women in this home, I expected them to be jonesing for their drug of choice, their DLC all the time. But instead, they were together and they had their own community. In fact, there's one of the TEDx's that kind of blew up, this guy, and says the opposite of addiction is community.
That's right.
So think of that. So community is what we create when we willingly participate in the environment that we're in. It's not culture. We've all got work culture, right? This is what we do. This is the way it works. This is how we talk. This is it. And you sort of tag along and play along because that's what you do to survive in that culture. But community, just by its name, implies there's a willing participation in it. And so these are the keys to success. And so for us to be relational leaders, it requires these 4 areas. And like I said, community is really almost a byproduct of that. But it has to be a safe place. You know, this is a safe room where you can talk and share. Had a horrible day, here's what's going on. Had a great day, here's what's going on. We rejoice together, we cry together, we laugh together, whatnot. So those 4. So those are the 8 steps. So what kind of questions do you have for me, or any thoughts that you want to share with me?
How do you think, you know, I think a lot of us, like going back to the statement, we're all leaders in our own right. Most of us don't think like we're a leader unless we have people under us, right? Right?
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Most
true.
of us don't really feel that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know would we continue to develop, if we want to, I know worse, these are the what and the how, but being, for those who are wanting not necessarily just the example of leadership, but me raised up in more of a work sense, what are some of the things that people in this field, in this room here, could do to elevate themselves in the work environment to leadership?
Yeah.
You know, to a position, because again, I think everyone wants to lead something, even if it's the dog.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that's the beauty. So we might not be running the company,
right? But
we influence the sphere that we're in,
right?
Right. So your coworkers, your peers that do what you do in the job, and so when they see you, you know, whether we, you know, you don't determine what the purpose and the principles are the company that you work for, but Chad has a purpose. Your eHarmony and your Crack Harmony and whatever you've got there, you've got your purpose, right? And so that's you leading right there.
Right.
And so you have to embrace the fact that somebody may be watching that, so you may be a little bit more deliberate to give you a direct answer to it, maybe a little more direct, or a little more deliberate when you do that, recognizing people see you and people see you stand out. Yes, Dan?
I kind of picture a shepherd and sheep.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a shepherd, if he wants to lead his flock to greener pastures, he'll just walk, and the sheep will follow him.
Yeah.
You know, so he doesn't have to get behind him and push.
Yeah.
So as we, as leaders, just walk in the direction we need to go, those that are looking for those answers will follow.
Yeah. Well, and I'm convinced too, and I alluded to it earlier on, so I know you're not supposed to ask women their age, but this should be a safe question to ask. Is there anybody 24 or younger in the room? So the reason I ask, so somewhere like around 17 to age 24 is Gen Z, Generation Z, right? Everybody's heard Gen X, Gen Z, and all that kind of fun stuff. 60% of the population in the United States fall in that age category. So this is, so I'm unpacking something that I think my wife still may be on this. I wouldn't put this on a public platform and say it, but in my view, this is second generation latchkey kids. So boomers call them latchkey kids. So it's second generation where both mom and dad worked and the kids were at home alone. So these kids, I can call them kids, okay? So the 24 and under, and now they have a name for the 17 and unders now is Alpha 2, by the way, if you're interested, Alpha. But they have more screen time than anybody in history. They have more alone time than anybody in history. They have more alone time than anybody in history. And oh yeah, we just came through COVID, and what did everybody do during COVID? You were alone. So they might require more nurturing than what you or I did when we were growing up. And I know this is a long way back to Chad's question too, but find someone, and Chad does, you're Big Brother. Chad does Big Brother. And so he pours into somebody younger than himself. You listen to them, you have that conversation, you make that connection, you will change somebody's world. And so Chad, that's a long way to say it, but you're doing it. You just don't recognize you are. And so that's why I said, this is all simple, but it's not so easy. It's nothing you haven't heard, but when we are consciously aware of it, it's the same thing as dieting. We won't talk about that too much, but if you start writing down the calories of the food you eat, you change your eating habits just because you're writing down the food that you eat, you know? It's simple. So we, especially, at the root of this to me is, as a believer, we are all ministers of reconciliation. Everybody is a minister. Everybody is a minister. You may not wear a collar or stand behind a podium, but somebody is reading your life. And so you need to be aware and lead well. I do have my contact information. I do love talking to people. I love to talk. Yes, no question?
Yes. Okay. So, what advice would you give to the leader that's transitioning into a new company or building out a new team to do a new thing?
Yeah. Well, of course, nobody likes change, right? Let's be truthful. Nobody likes change, you know, except maybe putting on different shoes in the morning time, but nobody likes change. So be aware, from a self-awareness perspective, you're going to be going through some uncomfortable stuff. But then if you're assuming somebody else's role, is this a personal question, direct?
That is very good.
So are you taking over somebody else's role that existed, or is this a brand new role?
Brand new.
Okay. Honestly, it doesn't matter because nobody's been in the role before, so you are the role. So whomever is already there is gonna, well, I could do that, or I couldn't do that. So they're gonna be looking, and I tell all this based on my own self, but I think I'm human enough. Unfortunately, they'll measure and see what you're doing, what you're not doing. And so you've got to walk in and be deliberate in what you do. But that love covers, right? That love covers. And so if they know, it's Maya Angelou that is quoted as saying, people don't care how much you care or people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
That's right.
And so it really is true. It really is true. So if you walk in love, you don't have to hug everybody in the room, but if they know you care about them as individuals and you're doing what's best for them and the organization, then they'll accept you and you'll have an easy time. Now, if you need deeper advice than that, we could chat and go from there, but just out of the gate, that's what I would encourage you with.
Incredible advice.
All right. So, you guys want to win a book? Everybody got a blue ticket? Don't get too excited on me,